Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for your patience as we're working on getting this PowerPoint displayed. Welcome to the Iowa City Foreign Relations Council program featuring our guest speaker today, Dr. Darlene Grant. Thank you to everyone who has joined us online today. My name is Catherine Lasansky, and I am an Iowa City Foreign Relations Council board member and your host for today's program. We want to start by acknowledging and thanking our annual donors, members, sponsors, and partners for their support. That list includes the Iowa Arts Council through the Iowa Department of Cultural Affairs, Humanities Iowa and the National Endowment for the Humanities, the University of Iowa's International Programs, Honors Program, and the Public Policy Center, the Stanley UI Foundation Support Organization, Midwest One Bank, Taxes Plus, and City Channel 4 for providing online access to today's program, along with the UI Library archives. The Iowa City Foreign Relations Council has adopted the Native American Land Acknowledgement that was prepared for the City of Iowa City's Ad Hoc Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Human Rights Commission. ICFRC recognizes that our home community of Iowa City now occupies the homelands of Native American nations to whom we owe our commitment and our dedication. The full text of this acknowledgement is available on our website at icfrc.org. As we get started, just a couple of Zoom etiquette tips. This is the time to make sure you know where your video and audio mute and unmute buttons are located. You all should be muted already, so we ask you to please keep your audio off for the presentation so you don't interrupt our speaker. If you want to keep your video on, that's great, but we ask that you try not to make any distracting movements or behaviors. At about 12:45, we'll pivot to a 15-minute Q&A. You'll be able to submit your questions through the chat function. And at that time, if you would like, we invite you to turn on your video, but please keep your audio muted to avoid any background noise. I'm now pleased to introduce Dr. Darlene Grant. In June of 2020, Dr. Darlene Grant joined the Peace Corps Headquarters Director's Office as Senior Advisor. From June of 2022 to February of 2023, she left her office in Washington, D.C. for Hanoi, Vietnam, to lead as Senior Advisor in the newest, the 143rd Peace Corps program. The program welcomed its first group of volunteers in October of 2023. Prior to that, Dr. Grant served as Peace Corps Country Director in Kosovo from 2015 to 2019, and as Country Director in Mongolia from 2012 to 2015. From 2009 to 11, she took a leave of absence from her tenured faculty position to serve in Cambodia's 3rd Peace Corps volunteer cohort as a TEFL English teacher and a teacher trainer. After 10 years of social work practice in domestic violence shelters, drug rehab, and adolescent and adult psychiatric hospital facilities, Dr. Grant worked for 18 years as a professor of social work at the University of Texas in Austin. There, she also served for 5 years as Associate Dean in the Office of Graduate Studies, overseeing university-wide recruitment for over 200 graduate degree programs. In this position, she managed a multi-million-dollar fellowship program mandated with increasing the racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic diversity in graduate degree programs. Dr. Grant taught graduate and undergraduate courses in social justice, clinical practice, research methodology, working with women with addiction, and criminal justice and She has authored dozens of journal articles and book chapters, and in 2006, Dr. Grant was named the Social Worker of the Year by the National Association of Social Workers. With that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Grant, who will talk about Peace Corps volunteer service as a 50-year-old, seeking dragons and drinking tea to partner in combating racial stereotypes. I'll turn it over to you, Darlene.
Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you very much. I have got to shorten that bio statement. um, Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, George, who is a recruiter with the Peace Corps and reached out to me to get this connection started. And to everyone who played a role in this programming today, thank you. Also, I want to thank those of you who are in attendance. I've planned to say more than is possibly possible in 45 or fewer minutes, so I will dispense with all other courtesies, save recognition of condolences to the families and communities left reeling and grieving in Nashville, Tennessee. I will attempt to both navigate a PowerPoint and my notes. And Catherine, may I ask, are you seeing what we hope you're
Yes,
seeing?
everything looks great. Thanks, Darlene.
Okay, however, I am clicking on the PowerPoint and it is not changing. Oh, it's not changing.
What if you use your right arrow key?
And thank you so much. Okay. As a social worker, actually correct that. For as long as I could remember, I have been an observer of people and situations. What they say, how they say it, what they do, how they do it, and wondering why. Actually correct that. Using questions to get at the story behind the why. Because often in the vast experience of the 8-year-old, 9-year-old pictured here, and even earlier, what was said did not match what I saw, what I felt, what I experienced. Some pieces of the puzzles was missing. Turns out that eliciting someone's story, be it a person, a group, an organization, listening intently, um, getting the story directly from their perspective without judgment, but with curiosity and respect. The intent to understand and even perhaps to serve as a mirror, to see the cracks and crevices that offer opportunities, opportunities for growth, opportunities for change, or even affirmation and celebration of strengths and possibilities translates nicely into the profession of social work. Turns out that listening, and not just listening for listening's sake, but listening to respond and to even know when or how to respond, is one of the most critical skills in international development partnership in Peace Corps. In my presentation today, I will mainly use photos and stories in fairly chronological order to connect my Peace Corps journey to ICFRC's values and approach, offer my observation on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and my understanding of challenges we encounter in our complex world. And I'll end with a brief update and tie that all together with where Peace Corps is today in this endemic COVID world, this post-racial reckoning world, where new generations of volunteers are demanding that we address neo-colonial language and practices and thinking, vestiges of saviorism that comes with that whole helping endeavor, and that we address our aspiration as an organization to share the diversity of Americans in who becomes Peace Corps volunteers. It is the Peace Corps approach, grounded in mutual respect and collaboration, that has been a catalyst for some of the best storytelling in the world, stories about transformational connections. As a 9-year-old, or just in general, I was raised during the height of the civil rights movement, the granddaughter of minister grandfathers, a social worker, eventually addressing some of the most gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching problems faced by children, youth, women, and families in society, and made later the life decision to join as a volunteer in the Peace Corps mid-career, at the height of my career, one might say, as an academic, but see it as an extension of my core cultural and family values of service to family and community. August 1979 photo with my grandmother during my first summer break as a college student. I had 2 jobs, and this was my night shift job. And my grandmother stayed awake until my 1 a.m. return to always reach out for her fish sandwich and French fries, and to share with me the importance of my going to university, the first in my family, my nuclear family, and of working hard to help the family, and the expectation that I would continue to do so after I graduated. In my world at that time, service on the world stage, something like Peace Corps, played no role in understanding where I would move in life. We were too busy fighting for basic human rights, navigating and surviving structural challenges enough in the US. This survive and thrive, give back to the family, uplift and unburden your family as you succeed in life orientation left no room to think about volunteering for the Peace Corps. We volunteered a lot. Our church had soup kitchens, clothing closets, events, etc., where we volunteered in our community. It is not an absence of a volunteer spirit or commitment. It is simply that must fit within the cultural context of where many people in the US today and then found themselves. I turned 49 years old after making the decision to join the Peace Corps, having lost 8 friends in 2 years, friends and colleagues in Austin, Texas, and in 2 years. And on the day of I'm sorry, 6 friends, the day of the 6th memorial service, I sat with colleagues and we talked about doing life differently and living life more fuller and broadening ourselves. The same thing we had said in the previous 5 memorial services. I went home to my little 3-bedroom house in a blue-collar community. My kids had long left home, were grown and could basically pay their rent most months, and found myself watching candidate Obama at that point giving a speech, if I recall correctly, at the University of Chicago. And he made a statement about the Peace Corps. And I stood there and thought about it and started my application that night. I turned 49 years old on the flight to Cambodia in July 2009 with 45 other young Americans, mostly volunteers. I sold my house and I was on a leave of absence, so I had a safety net to catch me. I was all in. Our group looked like many other Peace Corps volunteer groups then and now. We had 2 African-American participants out of the 46. We had 2 Asian American identifying volunteers, and we had 3 volunteers over the age of 40. We strive and we must do better. I remember the day I received my Peace Corps bike. I named her Paula. And I was terrified to ride a bike in Cambodia with the hundreds of motorbikes and trucks and tuk-tuks. And oh my goodness, I had not ridden a bike since I was in college. A brief few minutes of advice from local staff members on navigating local traffic did little to ease my fears. And in hindsight, I think about how much we ask our locally hired staff to do, including educate Americans, people they see clearly as coming from the most highly resourced country in the world, how to ride a bike safely. It would be a while longer after that unevenness and unease that one feels when dropped into another culture, um, um, for me to engage in effectively listening to advice, to know what questions to ask when I didn't understand, to get at the information I needed to navigate the partnership of me and country. All volunteers face this challenge. Not to change how they present information to me, not to insist that they fit their world into mine, but to teach us how to step back and understand fully theirs and their perspective. That's what it means to be a person who wants to make a difference in the world. I was quickly enchanted by the omnipresent dragons of Khmer culture. The 9-headed Naga dragon, if you will, especially this dragon who protected the Buddha as he meditated under the Bodhi tree. I knew so little about Buddhism, the predominant religion of Cambodia. This Naga appears and other dragon images in small rural villages, as well as king palace gardens. And I grew to gain comfort from the imagery and the meaning of a dragon, the symbol of power and protection that allows the maintenance of treasure. And as I learn and walk this Peace Corps, this service, this international development walk, I figured the importance of treasure in defining ourselves, our values, our desire to serve, ourselves again as a treasure, as well as the treasure of the other. The treasures they bring, the treasures, their strengths, their values, and to see them in a way that helps move their priorities forward, the reasons why they even invite Peace Corps into their countries, right? How to place their priorities, needs, hopes, and dreams above my own, above our own, is a part of the definition of service, right? ICFRC's commitment is framed, as I read it, in living out our long-standing values of respect for, curiosity about, and open-mindedness in discussion and even debate on international topics, internationally focused topics. Service to others, curiosity. We see these applications. We talk about these applications in Peace Corps, especially, as I'm sure you do. And it's easier said than done, as many things. I was the only 40-year-old in our volunteer group. at the end of 11 weeks of in-country brutal training. I might add the 8 hours every day, including Saturdays of language training and cross-cultural training, learning about the culture, the language training. Oh my goodness, 40 years old, 49 years old, and trying to learn a language when I flunked out of Spanish 101 in college. Pretty sure I couldn't learn a language. I couldn't sleep for days on end. I encountered a depth of loneliness that me, an introvert who loves and is energized by being alone, never imagined. And in the years since, have observed volunteers of all ages encounter that loneliness and battle it, eliciting all kinds of behaviors. So sensitive to that. Two things happen to change my experience of loneliness and understanding of how intercultural work, we must address loneliness, and we're supposed to, and that perhaps people fight back on this endeavor because they touch that deep, scary loneliness. Right? A Buddhist nun and a Peace Corps volunteer who was probably 22, 23 years old as well, who was on the path of becoming a monk himself. I couldn't sleep for days on end, and this young man, a volunteer, reminded me that I could learn from people very different from me and much younger than myself, and depend on them by teaching me to chant with prayer beads using the Cambodian Om Mani Padme Hum, not Cambodian, the Om Mani Padme Hum. And man, oh man, 180 some odd beads over and over and over again. One night I fell asleep with all the critters and scratching going on in my world. And a Buddhist nun who saw me and spoke to me and uplifted me as I uplifted her. We became close friends. Peace Corps, for many, is answering a call to service. It's differentiated from missionary work, which I often have to talk to some volunteers about. You're not here to do that. You do not invite your host country partners or friends, pardon me, to prayer meeting, right? That this is not that type of service, differentiated from military service, differentiated from State Department work. A volunteer on the ground, only given a stipend at the level of the lowest paid teachers in their communities, as I was. That's it. Not to be there as the ugly American, the rich, wealthy American with hundreds of pieces of electronic equipment, but to live like the people in the communities in which you are placed. Director Carol Spahn often talks about volunteers going the last mile, living in under-resourced villages, in the same kind of housing. So I took this 27-month leave of absence from a faculty position to volunteer in Cambodia as an English teacher. I was learning English grammar right along with my students on most days. After many sleepless nights, tucking my mosquito net under my mattress and hypervigilant to noises of unwanted critters in my host family's home that was very porous, lizards and rats and mice and spiders and oh my God. Oh, in a teaspoon of Khmer language at that point in time, I didn't know how to communicate very effectively at that time, except with my heart. And then one night I dozed off long before I had learned about Om Mani Padme Hum, and I heard a crash, a boom. And I jumped up and screamed screamed to the top of my lungs in this small rice farmer dwelling. My host mom and host dad were asleep on a pallet in the kitchen where they slept for the 11 weeks of my in-country training. My host mom knocked on the door timidly because they didn't quite know what to do with this Black woman that they had welcomed into their family. And I was shaking and crying, and all I could say for minutes on end is boom, just boom. And my host mother just didn't understand, and neither spoke English. And my host father ran around, and he went outside with a flashlight. He was looking around the grounds. He came back inside, and they just didn't know what to do, speaking rapid fire Khmer, trying to understand. At some point, we all settled down. I went back to bed, tucked my mosquito net under my bed. They went back to their pallet, and I didn't sleep all night, nor did they. All night, they were chatting. This poor critter, we don't know if she's gonna make it. Maybe we need to call the Peace Corps. I'm sure that's what they were saying. The next day, I got up, I rode my bike to class. I came back home for lunch, sweating profusely in the Cambodian heat, and saw my host father running from across his rice field towards me, yelling, "On, on, on, his child, my child." And I got closer to him and got off my bike, and he grabbed me by the arm and dragged me to the side of the backside of the house, and he pointed to a giant coconut on the ground. He picked it up, he pointed to the eaves of the house, and there was a giant hole in the eaves of this house. And he said, boom. Oh my, life changed. Life changed at my moment. And if I look back and recall correctly, I could see my host mom out of the corner of my eye, looking at the two of us saying, two peas in a pod. The photo that's on the screen right now is of my host mom and my host dad in 2013 or 14 visit back to Cambodia. I've been back 5 times, and each time I make a path to visit my host mom and father. I was not able to do so in 2020, nor a few months ago when I was back, and I am not positive they are still with us. They were very old. Moving on. 2 peas in a pod. Another story before I move towards wrapping this up. I think I'm moving farther away than I wanted to. Yeah, I guess that's where I want to be. Aha. I'll stay here for a moment. I'm enjoying a day in Cambodia, riding my bike home from school, when I encounter a family that I eat at their roadside restaurant frequently. And they're yelling and screaming and gesticulating, come on, come on. And I'm like, oh, I'm too hot. I'm too hot. I got to go home. I got to go home. And I have a lot of language by my 2nd year of service. And so I'm like, ate, can you akam lang, can you mouth be tau, tau, I'm going home. It's too hot. I'm tired. I put on the brakes on my bike quickly, and I turn around and I shake my head because I was like, wait. I go back, and they have one of the toddlers in this family painted with charcoal in blackface, and a number of little teeny wads of hair and brightly colored rubber bands. And, and I just have to pause and think, what am I seeing? What? I don't understand. Oh, and I think, thank goodness for learning over time in this work, we must not jump to conclusions. And I see it often in volunteers and others. Uh, How dare they insult me like that? Don't they know? Blah, blah, blah. That's so racist. Mm, mm. Drinking tea and and listening for understanding, listening to hear the story of the other, where they're coming from. Uh, the countries that we serve in don't have the same history of race relations, racism that we have in the US, and we cannot impose that on the way they think and present. So I got off my bike that day. I was like, I got to figure this one out. I got to give them the benefit of the doubt because they have been more than kind and generous. Many cups of tea later, I'm sitting with them, and it dawns on me that on every bus ride across that country for the 5 hours from where I live to Phnom Penh, the capital, there are comedy skits and sketches and music videos playing on a giant screen at the front of the bus. And I remember one of the famous um, teams of comedians, and that's one of their skits. And that's what was standing in front of me, is an understanding of comedy, of culture, of connection, of friendship, and not of the definition of racism that and someone in my packaging might bring to this interaction. I take that understanding of cross-cultural understanding in interacting with staff, with my host country colleagues all over the world. This is a picture of my counterparts in 2010, who I worked with as a volunteer. This is them a month ago when I was back in Cambodia for a brief visit and enjoying their families and their camaraderie and learning that the gentleman Sanuan is now working on a PhD. And my dear friend Panette has just completed a master's degree and married, and I got to meet her husband for the first time. I've returned to my homeland of Cambodia many times. I've used the stories of my service carefully and judiciously in my work with the staff at Peace Corps Kosovo, some of whom are pictured here in a problem-solving exercise. I've used the storytelling gifts, I hope, that I bring every year as a country director to provide a presentation to the local community through the embassy programming on aspects of African American culture. I must also volunteer as a country director. And it is an image I want the staff to understand, as well as the volunteers, that we must talk and share each other's stories to advance this work. I walk through markets and I entertain folks and put on costumes and try not to wear costumes as a symbol of my being down with a culture, not to bring trinkets back and use those trinkets to share as much about the culture, and let those who I am in partnership with tell their own story and give me permission to wear their garb and their symbols. Right? Not take and do just because I was there. I work with ambassadors. Me, that kid you saw on the first slide, really? Hmm. And I worked as the woman in of Mongolian safety and security officer on some of the toughest issues and challenges of safety and security with volunteers throughout the Peace Corps world. sexual assault, unwanted attention, all kinds of challenges with health and safety that we work diligently on addressing in partnership with each other and with community counterparts, host families, and friends. I've sped through a decade of experience and want to summarize with just a couple of points about so what does this mean? So many stories, so little time. In March of 2020, I haven't even talked about the first time in history we evacuated nearly 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers back to the US in 8 days due to the COVID pandemic. 7,000 in our 60-year history in 8 days. I happened to be on temporary duty in Cambodia and helped evacuate 78 volunteers. Full circle. As of March 22nd, we have 1,300 about volunteers back in the field, back in their countries of service, in about 53 of our 60 plus countries. And we are going back different. We're going back more reflective of issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm going to stop there, and maybe a question or two will allow me to elucidate on how we're going back different and the work we're doing today at the agency on DEI. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop presenting.
Right. I'm going to play the video as we start the Q&A section. So we'll now move into the question and answer portion of our program. Please go ahead and submit your questions via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. If you have not done so already and would like to, please feel free to turn your video on, but go ahead and keep yourself muted. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I'm going to play this video and also want to thank all of our members and donors for their support. If you would like to join ICFRC or make a gift to support our programs, you can visit our website, icfrc.org. I'm going to play this video now. One moment while I share my screen.
Are you looking for more in this world? Are you ready to be part of something bigger? Then we are looking for you. The big-hearted, the bold, the messy and the gutsy, the teachers, the growers, the builders, the skilled, the sharers, the change makers. We need you. We are the Peace Corps. In more than 60 countries, we go all in and go all out. We are volunteers, partners, communities, working together, living together, bringing our experience, passion, and joy to building a better world. Together. We are powered by connection. We're driven by purpose. We join hands to make a difference. We open our arms, our hearts, our doors, our minds. We learn more, give more. We share freely and serve boldly. Are you ready to tackle the tough stuff? Learn more than you teach. Plant ideas and grow wise to go the distance to make a difference. Then we have a place where you belong. Join us. The Peace Corps, going the distance to make a difference.
Thank you, Catherine. And I have got to report that we have a returned Peace Corps volunteer from my cohort on this call. I am just floored. Hey, Julie. Oh my, did my heart good to see your
Hello.
name.
Very nice. Darlene, we have our first question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
If there are opportunities for senior citizens to be involved in the Peace Corps.
Yes. And I say that with care. In our post-COVID or COVID endemic, and we're not post anything, our COVID endemic world, we now have newer medical clearance challenges that we face to ensure that if someone falls ill, we are able to provide the care with our Peace Corps doctors and medical teams, as well as in-country facilities, as well as our evacuation facilities and plans, right? So I say that with a bit of a caveat. Further, we also have what is called Peace Corps Response, which are shorter term volunteer opportunities, especially for folks that come with a professional skill that host countries are asking for every day. A higher level of skill than perhaps the generalist volunteer that we often send. And so that offers an opportunity as well, shorter term, with some lesser strictures than the typical 27-month volunteer. But my answer is yes.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you. The next question we've received in the chat comes from Peter. In a world of jobs and opportunities, especially for recent college graduates, what advice would you give about why the Peace Corps is something worth considering? I am many times asked, why would you want to put your career on hold?
Put your career on hold. It's all learning. We live in a world today, Peter, thanks for that question, where we find we are hiring folks who are not at the level of skills that they could be in conflict resolution. Let's just use that as an example, right? Or solving problems with few resources when the agency says we have to cut our budget. People's hair on fire, budget cuts. And we find when we talk to State Department and other federal agencies that hire return Peace Corps volunteers, they're like, we like these people because these people can make something happen with nothing. Or at least they go into those scenarios with a different mindset. Peace Corps is a pathway. While one is being fully supported by the US government with a monthly stipend, with medical care. Some volunteers report better medical care than they had all the years prior. Right? Peace Corps offers you the opportunity to do informational interviews with ambassadors because you are that close, or can be, with other State Department individuals, with directors and leaders of NGOs, international NGOs. It is on the job training and preparation for that kind of work, right? I was at Prairie View Historically Black University, Prairie View A&M, a few weeks ago, and the same question was asked of me. Volunteers earn and make a contribution throughout their service each month, a small donation to a sum of money that they receive at the end of their service that amounts today to a little over $10,000. That goes into their account after their full term of service, and it accrues monthly. So if they leave early, they still get some of that accrued funding that many use to go on job interviews as a down payment for their first apartment after service, a car. So there are opportunities for this to be a pathway to foreign service, pathway to federal government service, pathway to NGO work. So much. And we have to do a better job in selling, if you will, promoting Peace Corps through the cultural lens of different communities. I think we have 1% of First Nations people who serve as volunteers. It is, yes, a pathway to masters and PhDs, as we have the Coverdale Fellowship program that is Peace Corps connected. And I could go on and on and on. I'll Pause for the cause, Peter. That got me going. I see Michael's mic like, yep, that did get you going, right?
We have some nice discussion in the chat going that I'll share for a minute, but I have a follow-up question to that first.
Okay.
What was your, thinking about career, but what was personally your experience like transitioning back to the United States after your time in Cambodia?
Oh my God, I was meaner than a bear when I transitioned back to the university. I was mad. I was mad at the US. I was mad at our excesses. I was angry at the pace. I was angry that we didn't, before a meeting started, we didn't take a minute and just chat, right? We chatted a little too much in Cambodia, but we didn't chat at all in the US. You get in the meeting, it's like down to the agenda, blah, blah, blah. And I was walking slower. I was mad. I had changed. This thing had impacted my life, and I was 51 on the way back home when I got back home, and it was transformational. And I went back to the university classroom for one semester, and I was like, oh no. A student asked me, Dr. Grant, do we have to read all of this? All of these articles? You think you're the only professor I have? I rolled up on that student so fast, and the other students in the class were like, oh Lord, we heard about her. And I said, no, you really don't have to read anything in this class. It's a choice. It's your choice. You don't have to do anything, but your grade will be commensurate with the work you put into it. That's it. That's all. Right. And so when Peace Corps called me, my country director had chided me to apply. Julie, you'll remember John Dara chided me to apply to be a Peace Corps country director at the end of my first year of service. And I said, no way, no how, I'm not going to do this, because you don't know about all the debauchery going on out in these communities. And these Peace Corps volunteers, half the time they're losing their minds. By the end of my second year, the level of respect that I had for folks who served, and Julie, you're one of them, right? Who stayed the course, right? Oh man, some fantastic people in this world going on to be leaders and doctors and lawyers and oh man, yeah. So when the Peace Corps called me to serve in Mongolia, it was less than a year after hitting the ground, and I jumped at it. One of the handful of folks who served that quickly as a country director, but I was done arguing grades at a university, and I'm thinking about going back, and I'm not mad anymore. I'll still roll up on a student though.
The next question in the chat comes from Michael, and that is what the hardest part was for you.
Say again?
The hardest part for you.
Oh, geez. As a volunteer, as a country director, oof. I'll do one of both. As a volunteer, the hardest part for me was observing host country national, especially youth, lifting up white volunteers in my presence and pushing me aside, literally pushing me aside, because the image of the America was someone who did not look like me. It was difficult because I also observed that volunteers often didn't know what to do with that lifting up, and didn't know what to do with, or oftentimes didn't see me being pushed aside. And so I had to figure out how to share with volunteers that challenge without blowing them out of the water. And I learned more how to do that, right, during my service. But that was hard to see a people as dark-skinned as I am, right? But I learned more about colonization and the impact of French colonization and colorism, and changed because of it. As a country director, we ask much of host country national staff, much. And I think the hardest part for me in that is convincing folks who are working with a bunch of Americans that, as the director or even as the volunteer, I need you not to tell me what you think I want to hear to make my life nice and comfortable, right? But I need you to tell me the real deal, from your perspective, from your lived experience, of what is most important in a village community, and why, right? And get that across to me as a country director so I can advocate effectively on your behalf, as well as volunteers so they can go home and share ethically who you are and your story when they do their third goal work, as we call it. Yeah.
Thank you. I think the last question that we have time for comes from Julie, and that is, what strategies is Peace Corps using to attract different groups of people to serve? And do you feel like they're working?
Oh Lord, I've been trying to attract people of color to different endeavors, graduate school for one, for decades. And it is a try this strategy for a while. And then the priorities of the organization changes, and then you try another strategy for a while and the priorities change. So Julie, that end part of the question, I don't know, because we keep changing strategies on me. So new strategies. Is we have done a deep dive I was given charge of a project to do a deep dive on how we tell our story as Peace Corps and how we engage volunteers and applicants in understanding what Peace Corps service is by looking for neo-colonial language and saviorism language across everything, the job descriptions that volunteers apply to, right? When they look up a country and say, I want to go to, wherever I want to go to, Philippines, wherever. And we have looked at that language and we are excising it as best we can. And then we are talking to applicants and volunteers about neo-colonial approaches to development and helping to partnering. Right? We are partnering with folks. We're going to help folks. They already got their community level strength and strategies, etc. We're helping to uplift those and strengthen those in collaboration, right? With our sweat equity, right? We are shifting from the almost sole focus on college recruitment to looking at other recruitment, going into the federal government and other organizations that have employee resource groups, and talking to them about your agency actually offers you time off. You ever thought about using that time off to serve? And framing it as a re-energizing, a kind of a fixing your glasses, fixing your lens a little bit so you see the world different, you see your work different, and come back with something different to offer. We have increased the medical reimbursement that all applicants usually encounter if they have to get dental work done before they go to serve, or they have to get certain things done before they go to serve, right? And we've increased it 3 times the amount that was offered when I was applying for a volunteer to volunteer in 2008. We have increased medical coverage during service related to mental health. We have a big focus on mental health services for volunteers. We now have a phone counseling that all volunteers on the ground are available to them. And Zoom has changed the landscape in terms of counseling and access to support, either at the post level, at the regional medical unit level, or headquarters global health. Yeah. And much more. Our strategic plan for 2022 to 2028, I believe, has a huge section on intercultural diversity, equity, and inclusion, and interjecting
all of that lens across all of our operations, from budgeting, from who we hire to paint our offices, everything, and much more intentionally. And we are increasing and diversifying our partners in the US particularly. Great question. So much going on here. One last thing is we initiated an ethical storytelling project. Again, another one of my projects. Whew, I'm exhausted. Where we put together an ethical storytelling toolkit. Happy to share that with you guys. We share it with wide and far. It includes a video of a training opportunity and an activities book on how to ethically tell the story of someone from another culture who is not like you, but is a part of you. I think the folks on the screen are a part of my service. I cannot divorce my story from them, but I can tell an ethical story. Right? And then I can find opportunities for them to tell their own stories as well. Ooh, I can go on. We're bringing host country national staff to the US. We're looking at a project where we're bringing host country national staff to the US for up to 3 months with a stipend so that they can assist on projects, so that they can assist on recruiting, and potential applicants in diverse communities can hear the value of a volunteer in their communities from them, not from us.
Wow, there's a lot
Yeah.
going on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Grant, for your remarkable answers to everyone's questions and for your excellent presentation. We are so grateful to you for sharing your story with us today. I'm going to go ahead and conclude us because we are at 1 o'clock. If anyone has any follow-up questions, we have contact. So this was ICFRC's 10th program of the spring semester. Our program next week, Wednesday at 12 noon via Zoom, will feature speaker Anam Zakaria. She will speak on narrative making and politics of juxtaposition, focusing specifically on Pakistan, India, and Canada. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're officially adjourned.